Well, many of you probably know Delores Broten, and I know that she's been very active for a very long time, and her energy levels just keep getting higher and higher and higher. She has worked for so many things and in so many sectors, but you know, she has done a lot of things that clearly fly in the face of what the Harper government wants, whether it's tar sands, fracking, whether it has anything to do with pipelines, hydro dams, or the garbage that you put in your back lane. Delores will be there. And that's the kind of woman that she is. And she's been a great inspiration to a lot of young people in the environmental movement for a very long time. And it really, for those of you that know Delores and for the work that she has done with the Watershed, Sentinel, and now in Comox, but all the previous work that she's done, and the list would take me longer than she's going to get to speak. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure, in fact, to introduce Delores Broten.
Well, gosh, and I didn't think I ought to be on this panel. In BC, and hopefully in all of Canada, I really feel that we're at an amazing point of promise. The news in many ways seems totally grim and black, but we're actually at a turning point. We're at a place where labor, environment, First Nations, and many other people, spiritual leaders, poverty workers, everybody, we're discovering that we really need each other. And it's sort of like, my friend has a thing in her bathroom about how a family unravels a bit, but you can pull it back together again with a bit of work. And I believe we're at that place now, where we need to start pulling back together again, because the world needs us. And it's not just what's happening to our beloved country, which turns out not to have been quite as beautiful as I once thought it was. The history's pretty atrocious when you get to know it. But anyway, the things that are happening around the world to people, to native peoples in their environments, to forests and lakes and oceans, is absolutely, it's appalling. It's as if anybody who loves nature is actually in a kind of a caregiver's grief right now, because we see her being killed every day. She's still there though, she still has some resilience, but there's a great grief at the bottom of a lot of our work. Because exponential growth is bringing that industrial destruction to every corner of this planet. So the response to that, though, is where I see that we have this point of promise, this turning point. I live in the Comox Valley now, and in 2009, exponential growth came to the Comox Valley in the form of a couple of proposed coal mines. And we only found out about this in the Comox Valley Water Watch Coalition because the woman who was leading us at the time got an email by accident from one of the municipal governments. So, of course, Kathleen decided to go to the meeting, and she came back and said, "Oh my God, they're talking about putting a coal mine above Bain Sound at Fanny Bay." So the women in Water Watch, and it was actually all women at the time, decided that we had to do something about this, even though what we were really trying to do was protect public drinking water. A coal mine is a clear threat to any kind of water, so we had to do something. And we called together a few meetings of all the environmental groups we could get a hold of in the valley, and we'd get them all in a room together, and we'd say, like, there's this coal mine coming, we've got to do something. What group's going to take the lead? And everybody would go home again, nobody having taken any responsibility at all. So we realized after a month or two that this wasn't going to work, because we knew we couldn't take the lead because we were only a few women, and we were already up to here trying to protect public drinking water. So we held a public meeting. And the public meeting, we had to turn people away because the fire marshal turned people away because it was so full. And out of that public meeting, new people stepped forward to take on that struggle against the coal mine. And those people, like over the last 2-3 years, more and more groups and more people have come forward to take on that struggle. It's crossed social boundaries. The shellfish workers who are generally kind of small L liberal entrepreneurs have realized that this coal mine, even though it's business and they're business friendly, this coal mine threatens their livelihoods. So they've taken on a huge amount of the load in fighting that. They're going out and talking to all the Rotary clubs, which is great because, like, I don't think I'd have a very good reception at a Rotary club. But the shellfish workers are welcome. So they're doing that. The First Nations, who are also shellfish growers, are talking to the other neighboring First Nations. So that's probably the best people to raise that. The people at the far end of that coal mine, over on the other side of the island in Port Alberni, are doing their share of the heavy lifting by saying, we don't want a coal port in Port Alberni. You know, we just starting to try and get our salmon back. And interestingly, after all of this time with all these other people picking up the load, the groups are coming back together and they're calling themselves the Raven Revolt. And now there's about 20 different organizations saying, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll take on that part. So what we tried to do in the beginning has actually evolved out of people working together against, you know, this specific target of the coal mine. We've also, thanks to some very talented organizers in our valley, we've got a peaceful direct action coalition, which is kind of one for all and, what is it, one for all and all for one. However, with a good deal of self-determination and respect for each group's individual needs. And I think that's critical when we're trying to build these coalitions. We have also approached the municipal councils who've very firmly sat on the fence. You know, they've decided, oh, well, just wait and see what the environmental assessment says. We've been working as much as we can with the Labour Council. Now, the Labour Council's in a funny position because the Campbell River Courtenay Labour Council includes the coal miners from the Quinsam coal mine. So that's where we had to draw a compromise. Those of us in the environmental movement and the actually global justice movement who think that burning coal is one of the worst threats to the history of so-called civilization had to learn to choose our words. So we're not talking about closing down every coal mine on Vancouver Island. We're talking about not starting this new one. And so because of that, we've been able to work in coalition with a lot of different people who would not, if we went in there and said, close down all the coal mines, we wouldn't get very far, to be honest. So that kind of compromise is very difficult for environmentalists. But we need to learn to do that. And we can probably help all of us learn to make those compromises from something I learned from a Mohawk warrior who was leading the Indigenous Environmental Network from the Canadian Environmental Network. And this man taught us about something called the two-row wampum, which comes from the Iroquois Confederacy, basically. And a two-row wampum is a treaty where you agree to travel along together bound by friendship, peace, and respect, but to not interfere in each other's affairs any more than, I mean, obviously at some point you have to talk and come to compromises. So that two-row wampum, I think, is, I've found that a really helpful concept, which I hadn't ever, being a sort of all or nothing, first past the post kind of culture that I come from, I hadn't really thought about this properly, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And I do hope to learn more about that as we go through our organizing and through life. I put it another way. I say that we need to come to places where we have principled agreements and principled disagreements, so that we work together for our overarching goal, which would be that one. But at the same time, we agree to disagree on certain things. For example, I don't even want to get into examples because that's a bad way to go. But there are places where we are going to disagree, you know, whatever it is, whether a First Nation wants to put a copper mine into Fino or, you know, whatever. There will be places where we have to step back and say, we support you, we want to respect you, we will be respectful of your choices, but we reserve the right to disagree. And if we all do that, we can actually get along together. But it does take honesty, respect, and principled agreement and principled disagreement, and making room for that instead of ego and all that kind of turf war and all of that stuff. And one of the reasons we need to learn to operate in these respectful ways is because the very first principle of corporate propaganda is to isolate the radicals. Okay, and if we isolate the radicals, well, first of all, we lose all the young people, so we don't want to do that. But also, any movement needs its radicals, and we can't afford to be splintered by letting corporate propaganda isolate us. There was a great social organizer called Bill Moyers, not the TV guy, another guy, out of, I think he was out of California, but I'm not sure. And he went around the world training social justice movements. And he has a book out from New Society Press on Gabriola called Doing Democracy. And in that, he talks about the 4 roles of a citizen activist. He says that, first of all, to be an activist, you must be a responsible, respectable citizen, so that all your fellow citizens see that, you know, you're a normal person. Then you need the rebels, the people who stand out there and they say, no fucking way, right? And you need those people to set the bar. If you don't have that bar set, you're right down there in the mud. Then you need the change agents, the people who go and do the education, which is the one-on-one, talk to people, hold public meetings, put out those little pamphlets somebody was showing us, all that kind of work. And then after you reach some point of social consensus, you need the reformers to institute the changes you're talking about while you go on to work on the next part of your agenda. And I think if we can learn to respect the different roles that different groups, different individuals inside different movements play in the development of this huge thing called a social movement, we'll be a lot further along, and we may even reach a point where we can work together in respect, with friendship and in peace, to create, for one thing, a new kind of British Columbia. A British Columbia that is working in full respect of its First Nations and is co-visioning with those people the kind of society we really want to have.